Have you ever noticed that sometimes you know something before it happens? Not a thought, not a guess, just a quiet, internal signal, like your system picked up on something before your mind caught up. Most people ignore moments like that. They call it coincidence, intuition, or imagination. But what if it's none of those? What if your body is constantly reading information you were never taught how to notice? Signals that influence your focus, your emotions, your decisions, and even how you respond to stress and opportunity. Modern science already confirms that the human nervous system and electromagnetic activity extend beyond conscious thought. And when this internal system is regulated, perception sharpens, judgment improves, emotional reactions slow down. But when it's overloaded, misaligned, or ignored, people feel blocked, disconnected, and stuck without knowing why. In this video, we're going to explore what's actually happening beneath the surface, not in mystical terms, but as a practical system you can learn to understand and work with. Once you see how this internal field operates, the way you relate to your body, your mind, and your daily experience starts to change. And when that shift happens, life begins to feel very different, calmer, clearer, and far more intentional. Most people think their lives are driven by conscious choices, thoughts, plans, decisions they believe they're making in real time. But neuroscience tells a very different story. Before you become aware of a thought, before you feel an emotion, before you make a decision, your body has already reacted. Your nervous system is constantly scanning your internal and external environment. Heart rate, breathing patterns, muscle tension, hormonal signals. All of this information is processed before it ever reaches conscious awareness. This means that what you experience as intuition, gut feeling, or sudden clarity is often your system responding faster than your thinking mind. And this internal system doesn't just influence how you feel, it shapes how you interpret reality itself. When the system is regulated, your perception becomes wider. You notice more options. You respond instead of react. But when the system is under stress, operating in survival mode, everything narrows. Focus collapses. Judgment becomes short-term. The brain prioritizes safety over insight. Nothing feels obviously wrong, but progress quietly stalls. This is why two people can face the same situation and experience completely different outcomes. One sees opportunity, the other sees threat. The difference isn't intelligence, it's internal regulation. And here's the part most people never learn. Your internal state is not fixed. It's trainable. Once you understand how this system works, not symbolically but functionally, you stop trying to force change from the outside and start influencing it from the inside, and that's where real transformation begins. There's something most people never realize. Your body doesn't end at your skin. Long before thoughts form, before emotions surface, your system is already interacting with the world. Every cell in your body communicates electrically. Your heart generates a measurable electromagnetic signal. Your brain operates through electrical impulses moving in complex patterns. Together, they form a field. Not a metaphor, a measurable biological reality. This field carries information about your internal state, stress levels, emotional patterns, attention, regulation. And it doesn't stay contained. It interacts with your environment continuously. When this field is coherent and balanced, your system operates efficiently. Signals travel smoothly. Decision-making becomes clearer. But when the field is disrupted by chronic stress, unresolved emotional load, constant mental pressure, the system becomes noisy. Signals interfere with each other. Clarity drops. Reactivity increases. This is why you can feel off without knowing why. Why motivation fades. Why focus becomes fragile. Why the same effort suddenly produces worse results. Nothing mystical is happening. Your internal signaling environment is overloaded. And here's the critical insight. You don't think your way out of this. You regulate your way out of it. Because this field responds first to state, not logic. When your system is calm, the field stabilizes. When attention is steady, the field becomes coherent. And when coherence returns, your perception of reality shifts with it. Opportunities become visible again. Timing improves. Decisions feel less forced. Not because the world changed, but because your system did. Once you understand this, you stop trying to overpower reality and start learning how to interact with it correctly. And that sets the stage for what comes next. How internal blockages quietly distort this field and keep people stuck without ever realizing why. Most people assume that when something isn't working in life, the problem must be external. Wrong timing, wrong environment, wrong circumstances. But the blocks that matter most don't start outside. They form inside the system. Your nervous system learns through repetition, not through logic, through exposure. Every unresolved stress response, every emotion you suppress instead of process, every period of prolonged pressure leaves a trace. Not as a memory you can easily recall, but as a pattern the body remembers. Over time, these patterns begin to shape the internal field. Attention tightens, breathing becomes shallow, muscles hold tension without you noticing. The system adapts to survive, and survival always prioritizes familiarity over growth. That's why these blockages don't feel dramatic, they feel normal. You don't feel broken, you feel cautious, tired, unmotivated, without a clear reason. The body is doing what it was trained to do: reduce uncertainty, conserve energy, avoid risk. The problem is that what once protected you eventually limits you. These internal blockages quietly distort perception. Opportunities don't disappear. They stop registering as safe. Clarity doesn't vanish. It gets filtered out. And because this happens gradually, most people never realize when the pattern locks in. They just assume this is how life works now. But here's the key insight. A blockage isn't a flaw. It's unfinished regulation. The system is holding onto a state it never learned how to release. Once you understand that, the goal shifts. You're no longer trying to fix yourself. You're teaching your system that it's safe to move again, and that understanding opens the door to something most people overlook completely: how attention, breath, and regulation can dissolve these blockages without force. Most people try to change their lives by changing behavior, work harder, think differently, force discipline. But behavior is downstream. It follows state. Your nervous system decides first whether something feels safe, urgent, or unnecessary. Only then does action follow. This is why effort often fails to create change. If the internal state remains contracted, any action taken from that state carries the same signature. The brain doesn't ask, "Is this a good idea?" It asks, "Is this safe based on what I already know?" When the nervous system is regulated, attention widens, breathing deepens, perception sharpens, time feels less pressured. This is not philosophical, it's physiological. A regulated system processes information differently. It detects nuance. It integrates long-term consequences. It becomes responsive instead of reactive. This is where clarity actually comes from. Not from thinking harder, but from removing internal noise. When the system exits survival mode, the brain regains access to higher-order functions. Decision-making improves, impulse control stabilizes, future-oriented thinking returns. And here's the critical part most people miss. Opportunities don't increase immediately. Responsiveness does. You start noticing what was always there, but previously filtered out. This is why people describe sudden shifts after moments of calm, stillness, or regulation. Nothing magical happened. The system simply stopped blocking signal. And once signal returns, alignment begins to feel effortless, not because life got easier, but because resistance dropped. This is the turning point. Change stops being about forcing outcomes and starts becoming about maintaining coherence, which leads directly to the next layer: how breath, attention, and rhythm retrain the nervous system to stay in this state longer. Here's something rarely explained clearly. Your brain does not prioritize truth, it prioritizes familiarity. Even a regulated, clear state can feel wrong at first if it's unfamiliar. That's why people experience brief breakthroughs, clarity, calm, insight, and then slide back into old patterns. Not because the insight wasn't real, but because the nervous system defaults to what it knows how to survive with. Neuroscience calls this state consolidation. A state becomes stable only after repetition without threat. When calm appears once, the brain labels it as novelty. When calm appears repeatedly, the brain begins to label it as safe. This distinction matters. Insight without repetition fades. Regulation without continuity collapses. That's why motivation spikes don't last. They activate the system temporarily, but they don't retrain it. Real change happens when the nervous system learns, I can stay here and nothing bad happens. This is how new baselines are formed, not through intensity, but through consistency. Small moments of regulation, repeated daily, teach the brain a new reference point. Breath slows, muscle tone softens, attention stabilizes. Over time, the brain updates its internal prediction. Less urgency is required, less force is needed, less defense is necessary. And once the system updates that prediction, behavior changes automatically. Effort decreases. Follow-through improves. Decisions feel cleaner. This is why the most effective transformations look subtle from the outside. No dramatic overhaul, no constant push. Just fewer internal interruptions. And here's the quiet shift that follows. When your baseline changes, you stop chasing clarity. Clarity starts meeting you where you are, which leads to the next step. How external conditions, money included, respond differently to a system that is no longer oscillating between urgency and collapse. There's a quiet misunderstanding about money that keeps repeating itself. People assume money responds to effort, more hours, more pressure, more intensity, but money doesn't interact with effort. It interacts with decision quality over time. And decision quality is not a moral trait, it's a neurological state. When the nervous system is regulated, the brain operates in a wider bandwidth. You see more options, you evaluate risk more accurately, you delay gratification without strain. This is not mindset talk, this is executive function. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, judgment, and long-term thinking, only works well when the system is not in survival mode. Under pressure, the brain narrows. Short-term relief becomes more attractive than long-term gain. Impulse overrides strategy. Reaction replaces intention. That's why people can work harder and still make worse financial decisions, not because they lack intelligence, but because their system is overloaded. Money, as a system, moves toward consistency, predictability, timing, clear judgment. These qualities don't emerge from urgency. They emerge from regulation. When your internal state stabilizes, external patterns begin to stabilize too. You notice opportunities earlier. You exit situations faster. You stop forcing outcomes that aren't aligned. This doesn't feel dramatic. It feels boring at first. And that's the signal. Boring means the nervous system isn't spiking. Boring means clarity is sustained. Boring means decisions compound instead of reset. Over time, this creates a different relationship with money. Less chasing, more positioning, less pressure, more precision. And gradually, money stops feeling like something you pursue and starts behaving like something that responds to how you move through time. Which brings us to the final shift, how identity quietly reorganizes once the system no longer depends on struggle to function. At some point, this stops being about money. Money was just the signal. What this was really about was how your system responds to pressure, uncertainty, and time. Most people never question that part. They assume struggle is the price of progress. That urgency is normal. That stress is the cost of ambition. But once you see what's actually happening, once you understand how regulation shapes perception, how clarity shapes decisions, and how decisions shape outcomes, you can't unsee it. You realize nothing external was blocking you. The system was simply overloaded. And when a system is overloaded, it doesn't attract stability, it reacts. This is why forcing never works long-term, why grinding plateaus, why chasing creates distance instead of results. Money doesn't move toward desperation, it moves toward coherence, toward people who think clearly under pressure, who choose timing over impulse, who operate from alignment instead of survival. That's not spirituality, that's systems theory applied to human behavior. And the moment your nervous system stops needing struggle to feel productive, your identity shifts. You stop proving, you stop chasing, you start positioning. Decisions slow down, but outcomes accelerate, not because you're doing more, but because less energy is being wasted fighting yourself. This isn't something you believe, it's something you notice. And once that shift happens, money no longer feels distant. It starts behaving differently because you are behaving differently. If this perspective changed how you see effort, pressure, or money, stay here. This channel is about clarity, not hype, not force, not fantasy. Just the systems that quietly shape how life actually responds. And once you understand the system, you stop fighting it. You move with it.